China, a mystery encased in a labyrinth, is a subject of many arguments from various countries. Many are not aware of its history, hence it feels as it's a puzzle. The Xinjiang province of China and its Uyghurs are suffering considerably more than an adversary would in their own country. And the fact that the majority of the residents in the region are Muslims has become a source of concern since many Muslim-majority countries were mistreated after 9/11. Multiple Uyghurs who left China are revealing their stories, and the ones who are living in the Xinjiang region of China are forced to accept the treatment given to them in the concentration camps on orders of the Communist Party. Islam has a 1,300-year-old, well precisely 1,370 years old history in China, most of them belonging to the Xinjiang region. The Muslim population has significantly grown from an average population of 28,127,500 over the past years. These stats are from the 2022 Muslim population census conducted by the World Population Review and might possibly vary, especially considering the number of missing Uyghurs. To know more about Uyghurs, it's vital to know how Islam and Muslims started growing in China, so as to understand Xinjiang's political and geographical aspects with today's Uyghurs suffering. Islam was gradually introduced in China during the period between 600 to 1200 AD, when China was ruled by the Tang and Song dynasties. The Turkish, Arabic, and Persian-speaking Muslim traders traveled to China and started their businesses, which led to the initiation of interracial marriages between the Chinese and Muslims. Islam was at this point rapidly spreading throughout the entire Asian continent. It began to spread from the Shaanxi province city of Shan, even though Islam was not the dynasty's official religion. The Tang dynasty, Emperor Gaozong, was the first to permit Muslims to practice Islam in the state. Emperor Gaozong was also the first Chinese emperor to order the construction of a mosque in the Prophet's honor, since only 20 years had passed since the Prophet's passing. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan, a Mongol who led the Yuan Empire in China, started invading Muslim lands, which caused massive troubles for Muslims inside and outside China. Persia, a country with a majority of Muslims, was also invaded by the Mongols in the same 13th century. The Mongols were not Muslims at the time, but as the 13th century ended in 1295 AD, their descendants converted to Islam, and Mahmud Ghaznavi underwent the earliest conversion. However, the Yuan Empire continued with its methods of occupying lands and committing atrocities while rejecting Islam and converting to Buddhism. Prior to accepting Islam, Mongols killed and destroyed many Islamic states, which ended the glory period of Islam, leaving behind Muslims helpless. But soon, the Mongols realized the damage they did to the Islamic world after reversion and initiated rebuilding the infrastructure of the Muslim states. Due to this fiasco, the whole 13th century was indeed a disaster and caused many troubles for Muslims under the Yuan dynasty. Fast forward to the 17th century, the first anti-Non-Han or anti-Hui movement, which laid a significant foundation for the current situation for Uyghurs, was started during this period by the Han Chinese chauvinists. Hui and Uyghur Muslims are the ethnic Muslim minorities in China that still exists to this day. At this point in the 17th century, in the year 1644 AD, Manchurian forces initiated a full-scale invasion of China. One could argue that the Ming dynasty's collapse, which led to ethnic clashes among the residents of what is now known as China, was to blame for the severity of the political conflicts, which still can be blamed for the modern Uyghur suffering. In the early stages of its existence, the Qing dynasty, headed by the 5-year-old Emperor Shunzhi, began an extensive invasion of Dzungaria that significantly reduced the country's population. Later, after some time, the Qing dynasty saw a great decline in the population of Dzungars and supported the settlement of the Hui, Uyghurs, and Han Chinese to create a multi-ethnic area in the depopulated area. The Hans, a close ally of the Qing dynasty, opposed occupying Dzungaria because the territory was not a part of the Chinese region and did not share any cultural characteristics. Even with the opposition, the Qing dynasty continued with it. This attitude prompted Hans to start making efforts to halt the Qing policies. The Qing dynasty's policy changes caused a rift in the alliance. The Hans firmly refused to accept the Hui Chinese and Uyghurs with other minorities residing in the Dzungarian land that later got its name Xinjiang by the same Qing dynasty. It is important to note here that Manchus and Manchurians, who led the Qing dynasty, were also a minority and were only successful in overthrowing the Ming dynasty with the help of military power consisting of Hans, Mongols, and Manchus. After the Manchus took over China, things started going downhill for the communities living in the Xinjiang region, mainly Muslims. Manchus simply never wanted anyone above themselves and forced unity of the people by rejecting different minorities' rights, including the right to use their own languages, perform religious practices, and even use religious terms. This was the period when many mosques built were given a Chinese architectural look instead of Turkish, Uzbeki, or Arab architecture to keep up with the orders of Qing dynasty emperors. People couldn't call Allah as Allah and were forced to adopt a more Chinese word, preferably a Chinese god's name, to adjust themselves to the Qing dynasty. Although the Tang dynasty authorized Islam in the Chinese state, it named Islam Dashifa, which means the law of the Arabs, instead of Islam, which later turned into Hui Jiao, meaning the religion of Hui. Even with the efforts of uniting people, the Qing dynasty's laws mostly broke the nation into several groups. The Han Chinese became completely against the Hui Chinese, living in the Xinjiang region just for having monotheistic practices, as they believed that the people were non-Hans and did not belong to China proper. The most prominent issue with the Han chauvinists was the free practices of Uyghurs, Muslims, and Hui. These groups had different practices than the rest of the ethnic Chinese, as they were Turkic-speaking Muslims, which they still are due to their Uzbek and Turkic background. This treatment led to more issues for Uyghurs, an ethnic Hui living in the Jian City region. Knowing all this, it can be said that there has been a history-long rift between the Uyghur Muslims and a group of Han Chinese people that do not approve of Uzbek or Turkic ways in China, just because they believe it separates the Chinese nation. The ill treatment of Uyghur Muslims and Hui was so engraved in the Hans that even in the 20th century, the same anti-Muslim ideology started to appear again in the year 2014, when Uyghur individuals started reporting the high numbers of missing people, mostly Uyghurs. Surveillance, re-education, and internment camps, hijab ban, beard ban, nikah ban, and a couple of mistreatments by the Communist Party with the Uyghur Chinese to the journalists. When asked about the mistreatment, Chinese officials usually reject such human rights violation claims, even when they have previously talked about conducting military actions against separatist groups in the same region. While talking about separatist groups, Chinese officials also attacked Uzbek or Turkic speakers residing in the Xinjiang region, saying that there are people within them who want to break China, which majority of the world denounces and believes that the separatist movement is, in fact, due to the non-allowance of freedom to practice Islam openly. Besides camps and language bans, it has also been noticed that many detained Uyghurs are forced to do labor work and beaten if they disagree. Both female and male forced sterilization has also been one of the ways of the Communist Party to stop the Uyghurs' population from growing, which is sickening and heartbreaking. People are not allowed to go on pilgrimage on their own, except when allowed by the state arranged by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. All of the houses of Muslims in the Xinjiang region are surveillance using CCTV cameras and are spied on by hiring professional Chinese spies. In addition, a travel blogger named Joe Hattab revealed how many security cameras were installed at the mosque and how its administrators charged visitors money to enter the mosque, where prayer was prohibited. His visit also demonstrated that individuals were not prevented from entering the mosque, despite the fact that their attire was wholly inappropriate. Recently, in the year 2021, The Chinese state government also told Apple to remove the Quran app from the Apple Store. Upon inquiring about the removal of the app from the app makers, the developers said, "According to Apple, our app Quran Majid has been removed from the China App Store because it includes content that requires additional documentation from Chinese authorities." China also appeared to take pleasure in the UN Human Rights Council's decision to end accusations against it regarding Uyghurs. Most states have significantly accused China of violating human rights, especially the United States. The U.S. state government is also investing huge amounts in advertisements for awareness and managing the World Uyghur Congress, which also, many times, seems like a propaganda machine, since the U.S. has also massacred Muslims publicly in various countries using similar but more gory tactics as China is currently employing. The most important reason why China doesn't want Xinjiang to get independent is that it wants to build the Silk Road. It is one of the oldest roads, and Xinjiang serves as a good spot for the plan as it connects China with other states in Asia. It's expected that it'll make China stronger than the U.S., which is why the U.S. is actively participating in campaigns against China. The Chinese government considers all these efforts from the U.S. as anti-Chinese or terrorist funding, even when their deadly restrictions and laws put their own Chinese Uyghur Muslims' lives at risk. There are various reasons for the West to oppose China when it comes to tech, geopolitical issues, and finances, as it gives way to their personal agendas. There's no doubt the U.S. is trying to catch from these human rights violations and has no clear or clean intent to support the Uyghurs. Still, the reason why the West is specifically using human rights issues is a common question that the majority of the people are very concerned about, since the U.S. war in Iraq was also one of the most horrific human rights violations done by the U.S. against the innocent Muslims by accusing Muslims of terrorism, when in fact, innocent Muslims weren't actually part of the 9/11. Many people think that the focus that the U.S. has placed on the Uyghurs will soon disappear, because the majority of the West is trying to hold political grudges against China, rather than providing aid to the defenses of Uyghurs. Additionally, it logically demonstrates to everyone that the West's role as an advocate for human rights does not fit well, especially in light of their past conduct. It is therefore time for all Muslim majority nations to take decisive action, but sadly, many of them are unwilling to give up their material advantages for the good of humanity.